The wrong floor. The third Thursday of October carried the sharp bite of rubbing alcohol mixed with wet pavement and fallen maple leaves. Ethan Harper never meant to step onto the fifth floor of Chicago Memorial that afternoon. He'd ridden the elevator up because the intake coordinator's scribbled directions clearly read, Pediatric Specialty Clinic, Level 5, West Tower. He'd exited on the correct floor, turned left as instructed, but somewhere past the main nurses' station, the corridors had quietly twisted the way only century-old city hospitals can, forking into private wings that maps never quite show. He was hunting the charity pharmacy annex where he could refill Mia's asthma inhaler at no cost. The Walgreens pharmacist near their Logan Square walk-up had repeated the instructions patiently twice. Chicago Memorial, 5th floor, West Tower, ask for the income-based counter. Ethan had jotted it on a crumpled receipt still tucked in his flannel pocket. Instead, he found himself in a hushed corridor lined with actual oak paneling, brass plaques beside the doors, you're reading names like Whitaker Suite and Langford Room. This wasn't the charity wing. This was private pay territory, rooms with upholstered chairs instead of vinyl, windows framed by heavy drapes instead of cheap blinds. He stopped. In his left hand, he carried a modest bunch of grocery store sunflowers, bright yellow heads bought for $4.29 from the metal bucket beside the register at the Jewel Osco on Milwaukee Avenue. Because Maya, 7 years old and already wise beyond her years, had asked in that careful, almost apologetic voice children use when they expect disappointment. He'd bought them anyway. The nearest door stood ajar, not wide, just enough to reveal the foot of a bed, an unlit reading lamp, an IV pole folded neatly against the wall, and late afternoon light turning the glass gray gold. Ethan knew he should keep walking. He was out of place here. Worn Carhartt jacket, scuffed work boots, faint scent of sawdust, and polyurethane clinging to him. Yet he paused. Later he would tell his brother-in-law over lukewarm coffee that the quiet inside felt wrong, the kind of stillness that presses against your eardrums. Words failed him then, and they fail him still. He nudged the door wider with two knuckles. The room was bigger than most hospital rooms have any right to be. A wide window overlooked a small interior courtyard where sugar maples blazed rust, gold, and bruised crimson. The October light slanted low and fragile, the kind that feels stolen from winter's approaching claim. On the bed, a woman lay turned toward the window, awake, her fingers tracing slow, absent patterns on the thin blanket. Her dark hair spilled across the pillow. Her frame was sharp with recent illness rather than lifelong thinness. Prominent wrist bones, collarbones carved too clearly beneath pale skin. She hadn't heard him enter. The bedside table held only a plastic water pitcher, a wrapped straw, and nothing else. No greeting cards, no balloon weights, no half-read thriller with a bent spine, no framed photo of kids or grandkids, no wilting bouquet from a corporate sender. Nothing. Ethan stood in the doorway of a suite that probably cost more per night than he cleared in 2 weeks of installing hardwood and refinishing banisters. And the woman had nothing personal on her table. He didn't think. He simply crossed the room, unwrapped the sunflowers, placed them in the pitcher. There was already an inch of water inside, adjusted the stems once so they faced the light, then walked out before she could turn. He was back in the public corridor within seconds. He found the charity pharmacy 3 minutes later. Mia's inhaler cost $0. On the ride down, he shared the elevator with a CNA eating a protein bar and staring at nothing. Outside, the wind off Lake Michigan tugged leaves from the elms along Michigan Avenue in slow, deliberate spirals. He didn't think about the room again until that evening when Mia asked where her flowers were. He admitted he'd left them somewhere. She gave him the patient, unsurprised look of a child who has already learned that small joys are temporary. That night, the memory returned, sharp and uninvited. He told himself over the weekend he wouldn't go back. It was a foolish impulse, the kind reserved for men with disposable hours and no 7-year-old waiting at after-school care until 5:30. Ethan Harper was 35, drove a 12-year-old Ford F-150 with a dented tailgate, packed peanut butter and jelly sandwiches 4 days a week to stretch the grocery money, and had just pulled a 12-hour Saturday sanding floors in a Lincoln Park condo remodel. He was not the man who had time for mystery hospital visits. Yet on Monday, after finishing a quick repair job in Wicker Park an hour early, He found himself pulling into the Chicago Memorial Garage at 2:35 p.m. Mia's after-school ran until 5:30. He had time. He told himself it was coincidence that he ended up on the fifth floor again. The lie lasted 40 seconds. This time the door was closed. He stood outside feeling ridiculous, then knocked. A pause. "Come in," came the reply, low, slightly hoarse from disuse, but calm. He entered. She was sitting up, bed angled to support her back. Her dark eyes studied him. Not alarmed, not welcoming, just watchful. The sunflowers now stood in a proper glass vase on the windowsill, still mostly fresh, framed by the blazing courtyard behind them. "You left those," she said. Not quite a question. "Yeah." He stayed near the door frame. "I wanted to make sure I hadn't freaked you out or anything." "You didn't." A beat. "I heard you leave." He nodded, unsure what to say. This time he'd brought something else. Not flowers, nothing calculated. Just a used paperback he'd grabbed from the little free library box on the corner of Armitage and Hoyne. Trees of the Midwest, a field guide, dog-eared, with hand-drawn illustrations instead of photos. He'd chosen it because Mia had recently started asking the names of every leaf she saw on their walks. "I don't know if you read," he said, holding it out awkwardly. "It's tree season out your window." She looked at the cover, then took it. She opened to a random page, red oak, meticulously labeled, studied the drawing for a moment, then closed it gently and set it beside the vase. "I'm Claire," she said. "Ethan." A comfortable silence settled, the kind that arrives when two strangers have traded names and are deciding what, if anything, to do next. "You can sit," she said, "if you've got a minute." He took the visitor chair by the window. It looked almost never used. He was still in work clothes, canvas jacket, carpenter pants, boots that had seen too many job sites. He noticed, then let it go. Outside, a gust sent a helix of maple leaves spinning against the glass. "That one's Acer saccharum," he said, nodding toward the courtyard tree. She glanced out, then back at him. "Sugar maple," he added. "I looked it up on the drive over, for the book." The smallest softening happened around her eyes. "You researched a tree for a book you were giving away." Felt rude not to know what I was handing someone. Another quiet stretch. He stayed 12 more minutes. They talked about almost nothing important. The exact shade of October light, whether hospital jello had improved since the last time either of them had been admitted. Hers was 7 years earlier, for something she didn't name. How the courtyard trees looked ready to burn down in color before winter took them. When he left, he didn't promise to return, but he was already wondering what small thing he might bring next. Claire Whitaker had been in room 512 for 21 days before the sunflowers appeared. Nurse practitioner Sarah Nguyen had worked the private floor for 14 years and recognized patterns no textbook listed. How some patients began turning toward windows in late afternoon as though waiting. How others never looked outside at all. Claire had no visitors for those first 21 days, not because she was alone in the world, but because she had chosen to be. She had an executive assistant who sent tasteful, coordinated arrangements from a high-end florist, already replaced twice, a legal team on speed dial, a board that emailed urgent summaries daily. Yet she had instructed her assistant only to clear her calendar for personal medical leave, duration TBD. No one had dared ask for details. Sarah noticed the cheap sunflowers in the plastic pitcher before someone found the vase. She noticed the lack of a card. 3 days later, she saw the man in work boots hesitate in the hallway. Knock, enter. When she took evening vitals, she asked neutrally, "You had company today. He was here Thursday too, left the flowers." Claire met her eyes. "His name is Ethan. He installs floors. He has a daughter." Sarah noted the blood pressure, said nothing more. But when Ethan returned the next Thursday, this time with a small, potted jade plant from the hardware store clearance rack and a folded wool throw, he draped over the chair arm without explanation. Sarah was not surprised. Claire had begun noticing the quality of 4 o'clock light, how it caught the vase and threw tiny prisms across the ceiling. She watched for it now, without admitting why. The following week, Ethan came on Wednesday instead. Thursday was Mia's school fall concert, a recorder ensemble, heavy on enthusiasm, light on pitch. He rearranged 2 jobs to make the visit work. Claire was already looking toward the doorway when he arrived, the way someone listens for familiar footsteps without confessing it. He set down a small jar of local buckwheat honey from the Logan Square Farmers Market. She'd complained the hospital tea tasted like dishwater and sat. The wool throw remained folded on the chair. "You're early," she said. "Day early. Mia's concert tomorrow." "You mentioned she's been practicing hot cross buns on a kitchen pot for 6 weeks." He gave a half smile. "I talk about her too much." "Do you?" Neutral tone, hard to read. Then she said, "Tell me about her." He did. Not the polished parent version, but the real one. How Mia's laugh was two quick huffs like a tiny dog sneezing. How she'd started keeping a notebook of cloud names and would announce them from the back seat on any drive longer than 12 minutes. How she hoarded library cards from 3 different branches in a tin that once held guitar picks. How she handled her mother's death 3 years earlier. Car accident on the Kennedy Expressway. Black ice. Nothing fair about it. With a quiet, piece-by-piece courage that broke his heart daily. Claire listened without interrupting. When he finished, the silence lasted long enough to hear the HVAC hum. "My dad died when I was 13, she said eventually. "Mom remarried fast. I was sent to boarding school in Connecticut. I learned to work hard. It became a decent substitute for most things." "Most things," Ethan echoed. She looked at him. "Most things." Wind rattled the window. Leaves fell in slow motion. 3 weeks after the first sunflowers, Ethan overheard a phone call in the lobby. A man in a tailored charcoal suit spoke too loudly. "She's still not taking the meetings, Richard. The board can wait. She runs Whitaker Partners. She doesn't answer to it. I'll relay the message." Whitaker Partners. Even Ethan, who read the business section only when waiting for oil changes, knew the name. One of the largest privately held real estate and infrastructure firms in the Midwest. Names on skyscrapers, convention centers, university buildings across the city. He took the stairs up. Claire was on her own call when he entered. She raised a finger, turned slightly, finished in a clipped, professional voice he hadn't heard before. Compressed, commanding. She hung up. He sat. After a moment, he said, "Whitaker Partners." She studied him. She processed information fast. She was usually 2 steps ahead. "Yes," she said. "You're the Claire Whitaker." "There's only one." He looked at his hands. Clean today, but permanently marked by caulk, stain, sawdust. "I probably shouldn't keep coming back. First time was an accident. Second time, I don't know, but I should stop." "Why?" "Because you run a company that owns half the skyline, and I refinish floors in condos I could never afford." She didn't flinch. "I'm currently a person in a hospital bed who went 21 days without a single personal item on her table. Your job doesn't change that math." He was quiet. "I'm aware of the difference between our lives," she continued. "I'm also aware that in 3 weeks, you're the only person who sat in that chair and asked what I actually think. Not about EBITDA, not about shareholder value, but about leaves, about whether grief moves or just changes weight." He barely remembered saying that. "I'll come Thursday," he said. "Good." At the door, he paused. "Sorry I didn't tell you sooner that I knew." "You made it a very small thing," she said. "That's exactly the right size." November slipped in, cold and understated. Ethan began showing up Tuesdays and Thursdays when jobs allowed. Small offerings. A tiny potted aloe Mia helped him repot. A handwritten list of cloud types Mia had drawn for the hospital lady. A bag of cinnamon roasted pecans from a vendor near the L stop. Nothing expensive. Everything chosen because someone had thought of her during ordinary hours. Claire, for the first time in decades, deliberately chose not to run a background check. She could have had his full life story in an hour, tax records, marriage certificate, daughter's school enrollment. She didn't. She wanted to learn him at the pace he offered it. She learned he'd been married to Elena, who died at 31 in that expressway crash. Learned Mia was 7, obsessed with clouds and library stamps. Learned he dropped out of a construction management program at UIC when Elena got sick and never returned. Learned his mother still lived in Joliet, called every Sunday. She told him she'd taken over Whitaker Partners at 32 after her stepfather's questionable decisions forced the board's hand. Told him the heart attack 6 weeks earlier had been exhaustion plus chronic stress her cardiologist called incompatible with continued life. Told him she hadn't informed anyone of her hospitalization because she trusted no one enough to tell. "You didn't tell a single person," that he said one gray November afternoon when the courtyard trees stood bare. "I told my assistant to cancel everything. Medical leave unspecified, no one questioned it." "That sounds lonely." She met his eyes, careful, not cold. Having people who don't push back? No, it's efficient. Elena pushed back, he said quietly, about everything. Floor direction, grout color, whether it mattered which way the boards ran. She was usually right. She was difficult and wonderful, often at once. Claire looked towards the empty branches. I've never had anyone who was both. He let the sentence sit. You still might, he said. She didn't answer. She didn't disagree. The first Saturday of December, Ethan brought Mia unannounced. He'd decided halfway there it might be a terrible idea. But by then they were in the elevator, and Mia was explaining cumulonimbus towers over Wrigley Field and how they meant heavy snow within 6 to 10 hours. He knocked. Mia walked straight to the jade plant on the sill. Did you know succulents store water inside their leaves so they can survive deserts? Claire, folder of documents open on her lap, looked from child to father. I didn't. Most people don't. Mia studied Claire frankly. Are you sick? I was, getting better now. My dad brings you stuff. He does. Mia nodded, satisfied, and returned to examining the plant. What followed was ordinary and extraordinary at once. Mia asked about the courtyard, hospital trays, whether the bare maple was sugar or red. She listed her library cards, Ruishi, 3 colors, kept in an Altoids tin. Claire answered with the same focused attention she gave multi-million-dollar deals. Undiluted, present. At one point, Mia climbed into Ethan's chair, legs crossed, staring out. The room filled with a quiet that felt lived in rather than vacant. Ethan watched Claire watch his daughter. Something crossed her face, open, unguarded, almost pained with sudden joy. He looked away to give it privacy. When they left, Mia skipped ahead, narrating stratus clouds. Ethan paused in the doorway. Next time, he said. Claire nodded, expression still unguarded. She was discharged the 3rd Wednesday of December. Ethan knew it was coming. She'd mentioned it casually the week before. He was sanding floors in a Bucktown row house when her text arrived at 2:14 p.m. Out now. Thank you for everything. C. He read it twice, set the phone down, kept sanding. The message was polite, warm in a restrained way, the tone of someone unsure of protocol when a relationship has no official name. At 4:52, waiting for Mia outside after school, he replied, You're welcome. Hope recovery keeps going strong. Come find me if you want company that doesn't come with an agenda. 7 minutes later, she answered, How's Saturday afternoon for you and Mia? I know a park with a beautiful sugar maple. Saturday worked. Sunday worked too. December unfolded in short, cold days. They ate at a small Ukrainian spot in Ukrainian village where no one recognized Claire. They visited the Shed Aquarium. Maya narrated jellyfish like weather systems. They walked the lakefront when the wind wasn't brutal, December light painting everything in soft bronze. It was good, simple, consistent good Claire hadn't known steadily since childhood, if ever. January brought the return of her old life, board tension over decisions made in her absence, 5:30 a.m. calls with overseas partners, a 2-night speaking engagement in Denver. One Tuesday, she told Ethan about the Denver trip while he cooked spaghetti in her River North condo kitchen. Maya read in the living room. I'll be back Saturday, Claire said. Shed has a new planetarium show Sunday if you and Mia want. Sure. He washed the pot automatically now, at home in the space. She watched him and felt the precise discomfort she'd been avoiding naming. Someone living inside the walls she'd spent 20 years constructing perfectly, without permission or blueprint. Ethan, he turned off the faucet. I'm not used to this, she said. Not us specifically, anyone in my kitchen, someone knowing where the mugs are, someone noticing I sleep until 7 now instead of 4. She paused. I built something in Bitcoin that runs smoothly when no one's inside it. He dried his hands. Is that a problem or just a change? I don't know yet. Okay. He hung the towel. I'm not rushing anywhere, but I won't stay where I'm not wanted. I want you here, she said quickly. That's the part I'm not used to. He smiled faintly. That part takes time. February brought crisis in the form of a calendar invite, critical negotiation for a major waterfront redevelopment, final meetings in Toronto Thursday to Friday. The same weekend as Mia's winter band recital, her big solo on clarinet, practiced since September. Claire stared at the calendar. She called her team Tuesday morning, listened to 40 minutes of pushback, acknowledged every point, then announced she would join Thursday remotely and arrive Friday afternoon. She delegated Thursday fully to a trusted VP. Thursday evening, she sat in the 3rd row of Mia's school auditorium between Ethan and Mia's teacher, listening to a detailed description of a papier-mâché solar system project. When Maya spotted them, her face lit with pure, unfiltered joy. Claire felt something shift in her chest, not her heart, but certainty. She'd chosen correctly. She flew to Toronto Friday morning, returned Sunday. Ethan learned later, casually, that she'd rearranged the schedule for the recital. He stopped tightening a loose doorknob in her kitchen. "You changed Toronto?" "I adjusted the schedule. Toronto still happened." He held her gaze. "You didn't have to." "I know. That's sort of the point." He finished the knob. The kitchen stayed warm. Outside, February gray hung heavy and stubborn. The next October returned on cue, maples first, then oaks, then everything dropping at once on a cold Saturday that happened to be Mia's 8th birthday. They celebrated at Lincoln Park Zoo, her choice, because the honey locust there turned the exact copper gold she'd tracked all summer. Ethan carried hot cider. Mia collected leaves, building a taxonomy on a bench. Claire and Ethan stood by the pond watching willows trail golden fingers in the water. "Almost exactly a year," Claire said. "Few weeks shy," Ethan answered. She looked at the trees, the paths, the ordinary miracle of autumn. "I met with the board last week. They suggested a co-CEO for daily operations. I'd focus on long-term vision." He waited. "I sleep until 7 now," she said. "I'm not going back to 4. Something has to give." Big change. Big good and big scary. Probably the right ratio. Behind them, Mia announced a honey locust find. "Not on my predicted list. Very significant ecologically." Ethan turned to Claire. "I want to ask something." She faced him. "We've been in each other's lives a year. Mia calls you Claire. First name, no miss. You know which drawer holds the spatulas in my kitchen. I want us to have a name. Official, if you want that." "Are you asking me to be your girlfriend?" she said. "Or something more direct?" He reached into his jacket, the same frayed one, and pulled out a folded receipt. "Jewel Osco, October last year, $4.29. Sunflowers." "I kept it," he said simply. She studied the worn paper, soft from a year of carrying. "Yes," she said. "Which part?" "All of it. Every piece. And whatever comes next." He slipped the receipt back and took her hand. They stood by the pond while Mia explained honey locust pods to a bemused jogger who hadn't asked but listened anyway. Charmed. Low October light slanted through willow branches, scattering gold across the path. Not all at once, but in quiet pieces that, given time, become whole. The lesson life rarely announces its most important turns with fanfare. Sometimes it begins with a wrong floor, a small kindness offered without expectation, and the courage to keep showing up, even when the worlds you come from seem irreconcilable. The things that truly matter, connection, presence, choosing people over schedules, are rarely expensive or dramatic. They are built from ordinary moments. A sunflower in a plastic pitcher, a child's cloud list, a kept receipt carried for a year. When we let someone inside our carefully built walls, we don't lose strength. We finally learn what the structure was meant to hold. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that small, deliberate acts of care can quietly rewrite a life, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. There are more quiet stories waiting. Thank you for reading.